Well, today now we're going to begin the Putin era. We are going to start with the first page of the overheads that I've sent you. And if you remember, you should have the overhead in front of you or on a split screen so that you can look at them exactly as I go through them. All right? Again, email me if you have any issues. But let's begin now. Essentially the last 20 years of Russian politics, and this will dominate us for the rest of the semester. But even before that, let me recap. At the end of the Yeltsin period in 1999, we talked about the scandal that was associated around the construction of the Kremlin, reconstruction of the Kremlin churches and meeting halls, etc. We talked about the apartment bombings that led to the Second Chechen War, and this was really a boost to Putin because Putin was largely an unknown. People in Russia knew that he had a background in the KGB and that he had served in the Sobchak administration in St. Petersburg. Anatoly Sobchak was one of the first of the reform mayors in the post-Soviet period, a popular Democrat. And in fact, he is the only Russian government official that received an honorary degree from Towson University. And this was because of the exchange that Towson had at one point with the Electrotechnical University in St. Petersburg. All right, so if you have your overhead in front of you, you know that Putin obviously was born in Leningrad, came from a relatively poor family, was a bit of a wild child when he was growing up, but and had admired the Soviet intelligence services and wanted to be a part of the KGB. As a teenager, walked into the KGB office in St. Petersburg, or Leningrad at the time, and said, I want to join. And they said, you're too young, go to school. And what should I study? And they said, study law, surprisingly, from our understanding of law. So he has good native intelligence, graduates high school, goes on to the university. And Leningrad State University, graduates with a law degree, eventually marries, and all this is in the Myers book. I'm sure you're hopefully reading it now. And gets approached while he's in school, because you just don't volunteer to join the KGB. But they have recruiters in universities looking for potential candidates, and he is recruited while he is at Leningrad State University to join the KGB. He joins the year he graduates from the law school at 75, and after his training, he's assigned to East Germany. And now you have to think about this in the Soviet context. East Germany was an ally of the Soviet Union, but it wasn't the most prestigious of positions. If you were a potentially outstanding KGB officer, you wanted to be sent to the West, where you could spy in the West, and certainly you wanted to be assigned to West Germany, not East Germany. And in East Germany, again, Myers talks about this, Putin's primary responsibility seems to be to spy on East Germans and find people who might be willing to work and give information to the Soviet Union against the East German government. And so this is important for the way Putin will act as president. He is in some ways a recruiter. And a recruiter has to be somebody who can get to talk to people, find out what they're interested in, try to find common grounds, trying to build some relationship. When you think of the KGB, I think the first thing you think of is a spy, like a James Bond type. And that's probably what he thought of as a kid when he wanted to join, because he was influenced by a Soviet television show that featured a Soviet intelligence officer that had infiltrated the Nazi party and the Nazi government. But that's not the kind of spy that Putin became. That's not the kind. Most spies are not like that. They're looking to make contacts, looking to find people who might be vulnerable to blackmail or in need of something that the Soviets or the Americans, whoever is conducting the spy, can provide. So he's in East Germany as the Soviet Union is collapsing, and he comes back to Leningrad in 1990 and is looking for employment and finds a position first with his former school, Leningrad State University, and then shortly thereafter with the Leningrad city government, which is being run by this very liberal reformer, true Democrat, wanting to change the nature of this post-Soviet economy to a market economy, and one who wanted to introduce democratic reforms. And he worked in the city government, had a reputation for being a hard worker, a guy that could get things done. But Boris Berezovsky introduced him as one of these oligarchs that was very close to the Yeltsin family. Berezovsky remarked that the thing that impressed him the most when he met Putin was that Putin didn't have his hand out to take bribes. He wanted to get the job done, whatever the job was. So he works diligently for Sobchak. He actually runs Sobchak's re-election effort in 1996. But Sobchak is defeated in the re-election for mayor, or also what is called governor of Leningrad. And this is devastating to Putin because he has put his career basically under the path of Sobchak, and that's being cut off now. And what really disturbed Putin was the fact that Sobchak was attacked maliciously by his political opponents, and lots of lies were spread about him, and this left in Putin's mind a slight bad taste about the nature of free and fair elections, that a good man, a committed reformer, a man who wanted to change things for the better, could be attacked and voted out of office by a hack that had support of some of the criminal elements in Leningrad and went after him. So then Putin is looking around for new employment, and someone, I can't recall who, in the Yeltsin administration gives his name to the to the manager of presidential properties or presidential administration. Man I'd mentioned the last time, Pavel Borodin. And Borodin was the head of this presidential property management department of Yeltsin's government. And he is the one who is at the center of the so-called Kremlin Gate, this scandal over the reconstruction of parts of the Kremlin. There have been reports that Borodin got up to $30 million in kickbacks from the Swiss firm Metavex that got the contract. So Putin comes to work for him, but again, all the reports are that at the time Putin was not guilty of accepting any under the table money while he was working for a very corrupt individual. And his hard work got him noticed, got him appointed the very next year to the deputy of the president's chief of staff, Boris Yeltsin's chief of staff. And then in 98, remember the chaotic year of 98 with the world financial crisis, where the Russian government had to devalue the ruble and the price of oil dropped, and Russia defaulted on its foreign debts or couldn't pay them at least on time. And this was a great blow to the Yeltsin government. And Yeltsin was looking around for people that could surround him and help him. And he latches on Putin and moves Putin to the position of director of the Federal Security Service, the successor of the KGB, the domestic intelligence service, essentially. In 1999, he's appointed Secretary of the Russian Security Council, and then, as you know, he was appointed Prime Minister on August 16th of 1999. And that becomes the springboard for him to become president-elect because Yeltsin resigns at the end of 1999. And the 93 Constitution um, states that if the president resigns prior to the end of his term, the, the prime minister is the one who becomes acting president. And the law triggers an early election for the presidency. So in March of 2000, there is going to be an election for the president, and it is expected that Putin is going to run. And he's going to have some support from this new party of power, Unity, that was created by Boris Berezovsky, several other of the oligarchs in 1999. You know, this is the process of these parties being created overnight around a certain individual, a party that basically had no program other than it was going to support the government. It was going to support Yeltsin's government and Yeltsin's prime minister. And when Unity does better than any, quote, party of power had done before in previous elections, it's a powerful electoral bloc that is going to be there to help Putin, although the communists still dominate the Duma in 1999. All right, move to the next page now, and let's look at some of these issues that Putin has to deal with in his first year and in his first administration. Number one being this ongoing war in Chechnya. The Russian army that has reinvaded Chechnya has captured Grozny in December of 99, but the war continues and it becomes even bloodier and more brutal. And this guerrilla war that is just drawing on Russian resources and being reported by this open and free press, particularly the papers and media around the oligarch Guzinski. And several of his reporters are arrested by the Russian government in Chechnya and charged with being or aiding the Chechen guerrillas, the rebels. There's a lot of tension building up over this war in Chechnya. And yet, where the first war in Chechnya had a lot of Russian people being disgusted by the Russian government's behavior and the brutality of the Russian crackdown on Chechnya. Now, as a result of those apartment bombings, it's killed hundreds in several cities in Russia in 1999. Now, the Russian people don't seem to care what happens to the Chechens, but want Russian control be reestablished. But this is going to be a problem for Putin for a number of years. Also, the growth in the media bias that's taking place. The oligarchs control the media. It is somewhat free media because it's not under government control, but most of the media is under the control of various oligarchs who are fighting constantly among themselves and print stories that are only favorable to people who they are allied with. So you have a press that is not under government censorship, but it is certainly strongly controlled by the media, by the oligarchs that control the press. The third issue there is the conflict between the center and the regions. You remember when Yeltsin was fighting to establish the Russian government, and Gorbachev had put in the Congress of People's Deputies. Yeltsin was urging all of the parts of the Soviet Union, the governors, the regional presidents, to take as much power as you can. Well, the leaders of the regions in Russia itself have heard that, and they're also been amassing their own political power base in their regions. And there's this tension between the center, meaning the Kremlin, meaning the central government in Moscow, and the leaders in the various regions. And while, again, we come back to this super presidential administration powers that are in this Constitution. It is the weakness of Yeltsin and his administration that can't enforce the rules on the region. So this is going to be something that Putin is going to have to work with. And I'm going to introduce this concept. I'm sure you've read about it. The power vertical. He is concerned with power coming from the top down, not from the bottom up. He wants to have power vertical where the top, the center is the one that is in control of the government. The fourth thing I've listed here is the fragmentation of the opposition. Now, in some ways, this is a benefit for Putin because there is no consolidation of opposition. In 1996, when I was there as an election observer, I asked at a forum of election representatives of the various parties why the parties like Yabloko and others that were on the Democratic side of the political spectrum, why they couldn't unite. And I couldn't get a straight answer. And I think it is largely because so many of these parties are just extensions of the party leaders. And these are all men, even the Democrats who want to bring about positive democratic change to Russia. They're all proud egotists, and nobody wanted to compromise. And without the ability to compromise, it's very hard to have a democratic government, you know. And they're all fighting among themselves, and this is going to afford the opportunity for Putin to assert the power vertical. Changes the power structure is the next, and that largely has to do with the holdovers that he's going to have in his administration from the Yeltsin years. Putin beginning to build his own base, bringing people in, as you've read in the chapter on presidential, bringing people from Leningrad and bringing people into his government from the military and the intelligence services, and how he is going to reassert the control of the Russian central government. And last but certainly not least is the issue of the oligarchs, because as the central government under Yeltsin was weak, these oligarchs, as you can remember when we talked about the banking war, they are running wild, constantly attacking each other. They're not paying taxes. They're taking the profits and money that is given to Russia from the IMF, etc., and storing it offshore. And this needs to be reined in. This in Russia in the late 90s, as I said before, we used to talk about it as not the Wild West of the cowboy era, but the Wild East. You know, sidewalks in many of the big Russian cities are very wide, and the oligarchs and these criminal gangs that existed would drive their big SUVs, and that's what they all drove, right up onto the sidewalk and park them in front of buildings. So if you're walking on the sidewalk, you had to be careful anytime because an SUV might be coming over the curb to park up there. Go into restaurants. I think I said this in class. They had often there were armed guards in front of the restaurants because at any time you might have some element coming in and saying that they're taking that this business is now ours. You know, we're going to take control of it. All right, so let's look at the page that begins Putin's first year as president, 2000. When Putin is 47 years old, he is the acting president. And the very first thing that he does as acting president is issue immunity to the former president, Boris Yeltsin. And this gets back to what Yeltsin was looking for. Some people have said that in 98, 99, it's almost as if Yeltsin was trying out prime ministers, trying out somebody that he thought had the strength and could run the government after he stepped down, and then protect his political family as well as his personal family. Remember, the Yeltsin's opponents were talking about the corruption around the Kremlin Gate, the money that was being spent by Yeltsin's daughters, and the fear was that when the president's out of office and he's no longer immune from prosecution, that a new government could come in and focus upon the corruption and put his family in jail and certainly put a number of his friends in jail. And Yeltsin remembered, and again, this is in the Myers book, the fact that Putin, while he was working in the Yeltsin administration, had come to the aid of his former boss, Anatoly Sobchak, the former mayor of Leningrad, St. Petersburg. Sobchak, when he was out of office, his political opponents didn't let up on him. They started investigations. And there was probably some basis for those investigations, I believe, because I think the time was so crazy that almost every politician from the communist side to the democratic side were willing to take handouts from criminal gangs, other oligarchs, etc., anyone that had money. Almost everything was for sale in Russia at this time. So Sobchak probably, or may have at least, had some dealings with criminals. But one of the characteristics that I'm sure that Yeltsin admired about this young guy Putin was his loyalty. And when Sobchak got investigated and then got indicted, and it was in Russia, when you get indicted, you're almost going to be found guilty, facing a long jail term. Putin used his contacts in the KGB to basically smuggle Sobchak and his wife out of Russia, smuggle them to Paris, supposedly for medical care, etc. But this took a lot of guts. It also was a big, potentially disastrous career move for Putin, the young man. This is all before he was acting prime minister. But I think that sealed the deal for Yeltsin, that this guy was somebody who could be loyal. And I'm sure they had discussions, Yeltsin and Putin, before Yeltsin resigned, about this immunity issue, so that his family would be safe and whatever money they had amassed would be safe as long as Putin was the president of the Russian Federation. All right? Now, then we move down to February, Putin's famous open letter. It's an open letter to the voters, because most people have no idea who he is or what he's all about. And you can read this. There's an English version online. You can find it. Putin's February 2000 letter to the voters. In this, he speaks of the need for Russia to be strong, for the government of Russia to be strong. He talks about this concept of the democracy, the dictatorship of law, that there has to be rules of order and they have to be followed. And you can see the statist orientation of Putin coming out in this speech very early. He's a man who believes in a strong state. He's somewhat, I think, sympathetic to the Democrats. He believes that there needs to be an election. But remember the term that'll come later. He believes in a managed democracy. He believes that people have a right to express their views within limits, but that it is the government that has to have the ultimate final say. So it's a very authoritarian democracy that Putin is hoping to establish. But he appeals to the Russian sense of patriotism, and it's a very deep sense of patriotism, that he's going to establish the government. He's going to stand up to the oligarchs. He is going to stand up to the bandits, he calls them, which means the separatists in Chechnya. He is going to see that the Russian government is as strong as the old Soviet government was. He also, in February, has a meeting with the oligarchs, in which he tries to explain to them that he is going to treat them as if they were, he would treat them in the same manner he would treat someone who owned a small bakery or who had a repair shop. Now remember, these are people who have, since they've amassed this wealth and their political support of Yeltsin, have pretty much had an open door to the president. And now he's telling them that, we appreciate what you're doing, but you can't have a special basis or support with the president. You have to be like any of the other capitalist entrepreneurs. And that's going to be a real problem, and you can see how this is going to build up this tension with the oligarchs. And secondly, the second Chechen war, I have to put it here because it's, I said before, the number one issue he's going to face. It's ongoing, um, and bloody, and people are disturbed by it. But Putin has established a strong presence. Um, he is actually, it's coming to 26 minutes, and I think it's best to do these videos about every 30 minutes. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut this one short in a few minutes. But we're leading up to the March 2000 presidential election. And at 47, Putin is going to be the youngest leader since Stalin. And one of the important things about this election is that he's going to win in the first round, something that Yeltsin could not achieve. Now, flip to that chart that has the 2000 election results, and there you see in the first round, 52.9% of the vote. You see the second strongest candidate, Gennady Zyuganov, representative of the Communist Party of the Russian Federation. The third strongest candidate, Grigory Yavlinsky, the party of that Democratic Party, the leader of that Democratic Party, Yabloko. And the third, Aman Tulev, he is a Cossack, actually, an independent candidate, a governor of a region in Russia. Then we have her old neo-Nazi, neo-fascist anyway, Vladimir Zhirinovsky, coming in at 2.7% of the vote, and then it goes down to less than 2%. So Putin is elected. He has run not as a party member from this unity party, but as an independent president, standing above parties, just as Yeltsin has. And now he has a party in the Duma that still doesn't control the Duma, but it is a powerful bloc in the Duma, which is something that Yeltsin really never had. And he is now the president. So I'm going to stop here, and I'll come back, and the next video we'll talk about the rest of Putin's first year in office, starting in May of 2002. Okay, hope this was clear. Again, if you have the page in front of you, you listen to the video, unfortunately you have to look at me, as I have to look at me, and I really hate that. At least I think you'll make it clear. All right, good luck to all of you, and that'll be it for now.